What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G. Matthews, break down all the original content they watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking Season 1, Episode 7 of WWE Evil, the episode on Ric Flair. Now, this is really, I don't want to say no different, because it really isn't as good, but the material covered in this episode, talking about how Ric Flair was the ultimate villain, which he was in his heyday, talking about his rise and his downfall, his retirement. Again, I don't want to say no different because there are other documentaries out there that are better, but the material itself is nothing new. You really will learn nothing new if you are a diehard wrestling fan, Ric Flair fan, have watched all the other documentaries that, I have literally probably seen maybe 4 other Ric Flair-centric documentaries, and that's not even counting the Dark Side of the Ring episode on him about a year ago. So if you were wondering if he's still in bad blood with the company, this episode of Evil came out in March. They only reincorporated his woo, his signature woo, in the intro to the WWE shows like a month or two ago. Prior to that, he was like persona non grata in WWE. I know Charlotte's his father. Charlotte is Ric Flair's daughter, rather. Very weird, I should specify. Beyond that, though, they didn't really mention him or reference him coming off the Dark Side of the Ring controversy about a year ago. They've since moved on from that. But yeah, so the whole Ric Flair situation here, as far as what they cover, nothing new. You will learn nothing new about Ric Flair. I saw the Ric Flair WWE documentary 15 years ago when they put that out after he retired in 2008. I watched the ESPN 30 for 30 or the E60 or whatever it was called about 4 or 5 years ago when they did that. And there was another Ric Flair documentary. Oh, man. It wasn't Dark Side of the Ring. He was on Dark Side of the Ring, but I could have sworn there was another Ric Flair doc that I watched, and not just those two. But there's been a lot of... the WWE 24 they did on him about 2 years ago that I covered here on the on Network and Chill. So there's been a lot of WWE, Ric Flair, and just a lot of documentaries, period, about Ric Flair. They just did a whole road to Ric Flair's last match shit. So, again, I'm just kind of recapping it here because I watched it. It was a good episode. And he is one of the prime villains. So if you were wondering why they covered Sasha Banks on Evil and not Charlotte Flair, I love Sasha Banks, and she is a great bad guy, but she just wasn't a bad guy for very long. It's because they already covered a Flair and Ric Flair on this show, and they didn't want to do 2 Flairs, so that makes sense. So they start off the episode by talking about how Ric Flair always stole the spotlight, and he went to matches, and kind of talking about how he broke into the business and how he got interested in wrestling. He always went to the wrestling matches on his birthday. That was his annual birthday gift every year. He had very smart parents, but around a certain age, you got him in a lot of trouble. He got arrested for sneaking out one night and into a girl's slumber party. Not just him, but with friends, which is very weird, very odd. Very on point for teenage behavior back then, but still, maybe not exactly odd, but certainly not ideal. And he was always misbehaving. His parents gave him a choice, either between boarding school or military school. So I think he ended up going to boarding school, and he wanted that wealthy lifestyle. The people that he went to school with had that wealthy lifestyle. He certainly did not have that lifestyle, but he wanted to do something with his life where he could achieve that wealthy lifestyle. And he really didn't have a lot to fall back on, didn't have a lot of skills or really no other passions beyond pro wrestling. So he was very happy he wound up in wrestling. He was trained by Vern Gagne in a barn, and it was in wrestling where he found his purpose, and all the talking heads talk about how wrestling was where he found his purpose, but he struggled to find out who he was early on. He was very generic. Early on in his wrestling career, I believe 1975, if I'm not mistaken, he recalled a plane crash, not the plane ride from hell that he would be kind of torched on in 2002 in the episode on Dark Side of the Ring came out about a year ago, as I mentioned. No, I think he was actually involved in 2 plane crashes, if I'm not mistaken, but certainly one in 75, I think, that nearly ended his career. The pilot died. He broke his back in 3 places. But from there, kind of adapting his in-ring style, drawing inspiration from the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, and underwent a total makeover as a performer. He dressed to the nines. He started acting all fancy and as if he had $1 million at that point. And by acting that way, he essentially faked it until he made it. And he cheated to win. He could trash talk. And that's really where they get into the whole heart of the Ric Flair persona and why he was the ultimate villain back in the 80s in the NWA, in the late 70s, early 80s, throughout really the entire decade of the 80s, and how he really checked off every component of what it was, what it meant to be a fantastic bad guy, from looking the part to talking the part to being a great wrestler to really everything he did to win, the way he found he found ways to win, even if it meant cheating, stuff like that. So he was the quintessential villain in pro wrestling. And he was also the total opposite of a guy like Dusty Rhodes, and that's why they worked so well together, because they were such polar opposites as characters. They talk about Dusty leaving Ric Flair only to attack him following a cage match, I think that he had against Ivan Koloff or someone like that, a very famous cage match back in the day. The fans rushed the cage afterward because they were so pissed at Ric Flair for what he did. He had real heat back then. They talk about the creation of the Four Horsemen and how they're one of, if not the greatest wrestling faction of all time. And it was around the time that he distanced himself from the Horsemen by the late 80s that he really started to return to his wrestling roots and focusing more on his in-ring ability and having better matches, even better matches than he was already having, with people like Ricky Steamboat in the early 90s, having one of the greatest trilogy of matches with Steamboat of all time. Dr. fucking Phil shows up again. He's on a lot of these episodes, because even though he's not a real doctor, but Dr. Phil shows up and says that Ric Flair embodied what people aspired to be in real life. Flair talks about making up the Space Mountain line, and obviously it was inspired by the Disney ride Space Mountain, but that's what he referred to his private parts as Space Mountain one day, and it clicked and it worked, and he used it from there on out. They talk about him winning the WWE Championship at the Royal Rumble 1992, and how it kind of marked the peak of his professional career. Now, he had better work. He had a great run in WWE. I think his real peak was probably in the late 80s. But professionally, maybe Sam Roberts pointed out how we mentioned in his post-match promo that was the greatest moment in his entire life. Not the birth of his kids or anyone that he married or whatever. That was the greatest moment in his entire life. Not even winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, I guess. That's what Sam Roberts implies here with his comments. But his career influenced the lavish lifestyle that he lived outside of the ring. And that's where they kind of get into the real dark side, so to speak, no pun intended, of Ric Flair's personal life and how the gimmick kind of transcended over to reality and kind of influenced who he was in real life and stuff like that. They talked about how there was no pretend in any of what he did, and he became Ric Flair, Richard Flair or whatever his real name is, became Ric Flair, and there was no line between who Ric Flair was and who he was outside of the ring, both in the ring and outside of the ring. He talks about paying alimony to 3 women back then and how it's got to be some sort of a record. He ended up returning to WCW at his own request in 1993. This is a very notable story, so I'm probably messing up the facts here. But he mentioned here how at the onset of 93, he had the choice of either staying in WWE and kind of moving down the card a little bit, or going back to WCW, who he was in constant contact with, I guess, because they never stopped bothering him while he was in WWE, he said, going back there and being a top guy. And he agreed to go back to WCW, and that's where he wound up. It wasn't long after that Hogan came in, the NWA came to be, NWO, did I say NWA? The NWO came to be in 1996. They really took over, and Flair was shown as an inferior athlete on screen. And there was an end potentially in sight to his career on that final Nitro, where he just looked like a shell of his former self. And that was in 2001. In March of 2001, he continued to wrestle for years after that, so I'll get into that now. Vince asked him what he was doing next, ended up leading to his return to WWE in late 2001, had his first major official match back at the Rumble 92, or 02 rather, where he faced Vince McMahon. And it took him a while to kind of find that confidence again, because he was really down on himself, and Evolution was really where he restored his confidence, fans started to respect him, and he didn't become a good guy or a bad guy, he was just Ric Flair. And they talk about the storyline where the next match you lose will be your last. And that started in late 2007, culminated at WrestleMania 24. Shawn Michaels took that honor to wrestle Ric Flair's final match, at least at that point in WWE. He took it very seriously. Obviously lost that retirement match at WrestleMania 24, had the Great Hall of Fame induction the night before, and also had his final match, or final Hall of Fame send-off the next night on Raw, in one of the best moments in Raw history. They talk about how he influenced pop culture, and Charlotte now possesses the same traits as her father. The Woo was iconic. Ric Flair says, "What you see is what you get with me." And Charlotte says that his actions, they were probably justified in the ring because they led him to a record-setting 16 world championships. And that was about it. So, no, they do not get into the TNA stuff. This was obviously before his final match was even announced for SummerSlam weekend this year. Not that they would cover that anyway. They only cover the WWE lore stuff, including NWA and WCW. None of the TNA stuff, which I think they did cover I don't know if they covered it in the WWE 24. I don't remember. I did review it here on the channel 2 years ago. I don't remember. I know they covered it in the E60 stuff, which was 5 years ago, like I said. But this was fine. Definitely not an episode you need to go out of your way to see. I feel like I've just seen a lot of Ric Flair content, and this wasn't the most engaging because I've heard the same stories a million times over. And he is one of the greatest of all time. There's no questioning that, at least inside the ring and on promos and stuff. And he is a great subject for a show like this because he was the epitome of what it meant to be a bad guy back then. But just the actual material itself, it was really more of a biography on Ric Flair. I mean, if they do a fucking biography on A&E on Ric Flair, I'm going to be pissed because it's going to be all the same shit from all the same people. The Sam Robertses and the people that already work in the company and stuff like that. I have no interest in seeing that rehash. So nothing new here. It was a good episode, but it was boring for someone like me who was already heard this story from Flair's point of view a million times. But if you haven't, and you know someone who hasn't, I mean, I would implore you to watch the WWE or the E60 that ESPN did about 4 or 5 years ago. I would probably recommend you watch that over this. But if they're on Peacock and they're watching this show and they haven't really been introduced to who Ric Flair is yet, this might be a good starting point. So those are my thoughts on the episode. Thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Have an awesome one, guys. I will be reviewing the next and final episode, I think in Season 1, on Roman Reigns soon, so keep an eye out for that. I don't know if they're doing more episodes. I don't know if they're doing a second season. I haven't heard anything. The show came out 6 months ago. I've heard nothing. They may, they won't, they may not. I don't know. My guess is that they probably won't. WWE may focus their efforts on the A&E stuff, so keep an eye out for that. And I'll probably watch and review those at some point when I get the time, because those are 2 hours. These episodes are a quick 45 minutes. The biographies on A&E, which are great from what I've heard, they're just very long. So it's going to take me a long time to get through those at some point in probably down the road in the future and not anytime soon. But anyway, guys, enjoy your week. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.